So let's start with just introduce yourself, who you are and what you do.
I'm Gabe de Varona, or Gabriel in my professional, in how my name reads in credits, because it sounds more professional than Gabe. But then that's too professional for real life, so Gabe. I'm a filmmaker. I was born and raised in Miami. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into of my experiences on that at this point, but
however you see yourself.
I've been making films for about 15 years now, short films, and working as a freelance editor and just kind of really whatever work I can get in film. Some I've edited, I've PA'd, I've camera operated, how it is basically, just whatever pays is what you do early on. So
you're listening to Miami Film Labs, Crew Call 305.
Crew Call 305, making a living as a filmmaker.
Cool. So do you mostly, like, your personal stuff, you work as a director, but what's paying the bills? Is it editing work? Is it directing work?
Yeah. So I went to Emerson College for grad school. And there I took some marketing classes. So I have a little bit of marketing experience and background. So I do marketing for Mariquitas chips. And then I also kind of just help a lot of small businesses usually with marketing, their social media content.
Mariquitas, proud sponsor of Miami Film Lab.
Yes, Mariquitas. Since I'm the one that kind of deals with their marketing stuff, is I always say, like, with film shoots, like, we'll have a lot of short films or indie producers come in and say, like, hey, can you donate some product for Crafty or whatever? And that's always, since I'm a filmmaker too, I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, I'll get like a couple cases and, for set. But for work, yeah, basically that, marketing with them and other small businesses that I've helped out with. There's a personal trainer I work with that he's always shooting different, like, either like exercise gear or clothing. They'll like send him products and he shoots spots and I'll go and shoot with him and edit them and everything. So really whatever, the good thing with Florida is that there's so many small businesses that as far as like a videographer or a filmmaker, there's a lot of work to do, kind of commercial work and social media content, which now is like all marketing now is basically social media. It's like TV and everything is gone. Like everybody just uses social media, especially if you're a small business, because it's cheaper.
What have you found harder, to find clients to get marketing work from, or to raise money for your own productions?
Oh, definitely raise money for your own productions. Yeah. Because, getting work from clients, I'll try to find like a good amount of clients. Like Mariquitas is kind of my main one, but then I'm pretty flexible. Like if I see someone's just starting out, it's like you kind of just need a little push. It's like I'll be like, okay, well, I'll make like 5 or 6 videos for like a lower rate, just because it's kind of their, initial, they're starting their company and they don't really have that much money yet. And then usually I'll stay on with them after that because they've liked the work. So.
Is working on the kind of social media marketing thing a means to do your own projects, or you enjoy doing a little bit of both?
I mean, I enjoy it. It's better. It's definitely better than like other jobs I've had. I lived in New York for 10 years after basically I went up there for college and I kind of stayed there doing freelance work. And I worked in public broadcasting up there, some different channels. And that work was always, I would say, is more boring because it was a lot of like city hall meetings and things like that, where like in a way it was interesting because you got to see like the inner workings of politics in like a small town in New York, and just saw like I see now a lot of the issues whenever I'm looking at like congressional meetings or like even local things. You're like, oh, I see how it all is. Like it's always the same thing. So it's always just a bunch of people sitting in a circle, all like arguing over each other, or like one person bringing up something they think is super important, but then at the end of the day, nobody actually wants to like commit to change anything. So that would get a little boring doing those kind of shoots, versus like the social media stuff is a little more flexible because a lot of companies, they don't really know. They're kind of like, we don't have time or like really the energy to put into like thinking of what we want to do for our marketing. So they kind of give you free reign, more so, than even working in like with higher paying gigs and stuff where they're companies that are bigger,
So how have most of those clients kind of been finding you, or how have you been going out and finding them?
Different ways. A lot of times it's just like either a friend will recommend me because they couldn't do that job for whatever reason, and they're like, hey, I know this guy, he's good, and I've gone that way. Or like the personal trainer I work with, he was one of my relatives' personal trainers, and I met him that way, and he found out that I did video, and he's like, oh, let's get together and do. So basically just kind of like going around and like at different events and stuff, just saying that like, yeah, I do film and I do marketing and social, and usually somebody will be like, oh, I have a small business and I need blah, blah, blah. So really I haven't really had to do much as far as like putting myself out there online, I guess. It's more just in person, like just going to events and.
So word of mouth.
Word of mouth, yeah.
Have you found that you've had to really go out and find them, or people have been finding you? I know you didn't put yourself online to find them, but like, has it been hard to get clients and people, or have your kind of group of clients and things been steadily growing since you started doing it?
It fluctuates. Like there's some times where like I'll have a good amount of clients and it's good, but then sometimes I'll lose clients. Like sometimes, you know, whatever reason, they'll find someone that does it cheaper or something, or they'll just go with an ad agency or something. They get bigger. So it kind of fluctuates, but yeah, you know, early on it was harder. Now at this point, it's a little easier. Just the more years you put in, obviously, the more relationships you develop and that. So, but definitely, yeah, I had to go. You know, I had to force myself to go to like networking events and things.
I think a lot of people, you do a lot of indie film and a lot of your own projects, feel that like working those marketing jobs and those paycheck jobs kind of take away from the energy and the time you can put into creative things. Do you agree with that? Or is it like just another way to be creative and, you know, support yourself?
Yeah, I kind of see it as just another way to be creative. It doesn't really affect the personal work I do. But that's also, most of what I do is post-production. So I have a lot of friends that do, you know, that are on set more. And in those cases, I see them, they do get kind of like tired out by the work. You know, they're on set 12 hours a day. It's hard to go back home and write, you know. But with post-production, it's like you're kind of, especially with editing and sound design, there's a lot of the work I do. It's really like, I don't have like a strict like 12-hour day I need to do. It's like as long as I get whatever done in a certain amount of time, it's fine. So it's the energy isn't as draining. It's also not as like physically demanding. So but yeah, I mean, I think it all kind of supports each other. Like you can take things that you learn from the marketing projects you do and bring them into the indie stuff. Like a lot of the editing I've done more editing for like commercial work and stuff than I have for actual films. So a lot of my editing experience just comes from that. So you learn kind of, I would say it's a good thing because you kind of learn like how to keep an audience's attention because you're more focused on that. It's not so much about like expressing something. It's just more about doing something for a client. So you have to keep people's interest.
And so let's talk a little bit about your own personal projects. What was the first kind of your projects that you created and how did that come about?
The first, we'll be back in New York. I guess my first like, because I would always shoot things when I was young, like get a digital camera and my dad's camera or whatever. Back VHS actually was the first thing I started was with the little VHS thing you had to put in, and I would edit on like a VHS recorder.
Damn.
And just cut like, yeah, like literally cut like forward, record, rewind, and then go back, get another take, like literally like.
Really aging yourself there.
Super, yeah. Well, the thing is, it wasn't even like, there was editing software at the time. I just didn't know, I didn't know about them. And my family wasn't like super big on, you know, a lot of them, they're not really like film people or art people. So, you know, we had a home computer and that's it, like one computer in the house. So I didn't really even think I could get an editing software. And then finally there was some software, I think it was called Pinnacle, which I don't even know if it exists anymore, but some editing software that was cheap and I got, and then I started playing with editing on it. But I would say like the first like serious short film I did was probably back 2011, my like thesis for college. I kind of started doing a lot of like horror and like dark comedy, horror comedy. Usually was trying to play around with like making some like nasty, gory effects with, I had makeup artist friends and that. So it was just fun to think of like, I think the first one I did, it was a scene with, it was like a guy breaking into an apartment. It was like, he was like all cracked out or he's on drugs and he's hiding in a closet and he's going to jump out and attack the people. And there's a whole fight. And eventually they stop him by like putting a food processor on his head and crank. So we had to think of, we're going to, you know, I think I actually used my grandmother's old fruit processor from here that I brought over to New York, and we took out the blades and just put like the empty thing on his head. And like usually, you had the cut of seeing the blades, and then we, cut, and then it would be without it, and then they just put it on his head, and then it was like a tube connected with the fake blood that would kind of shoot out. So I always had a good time thinking of those type of things and how to create those effects and that. But then I spent like a few years doing that and working with other friends that were in that same scene. It was a makeup effects artist I worked with there in New York, Mr. Dead was his name, his like stage name. He was a hip hop artist and makeup effects. So and he was a lot of fun. He's like, I'd say now he's probably like in his 60s, but he was about 50 when I worked with him, and he had like a very young energy. So there'll be times we're working. He's like, Gabe, do you remember when it was 25 cents to go see a double feature in Times Square of these grindhouse movies? I'm like, Dad, I'm 23 years old. It's like I was born in 1988. That was long gone. I mean, I've heard of it. It sounds cool, but I was not around. He's like, oh damn, I forget sometimes that you're not an older person. I'm big into like older movies and that. But I would say, I had a long time of just creating those kind of movies up in New York. And then it was in 2019, I did a short down here in Miami that was centered more kind of around my Cuban culture and family and all that. I still had a little bit of like genre-ish stuff because it was like a hurricane that like hit a house and the family's kind of surviving together. So I still wanted to do something that wasn't just like a family.
Hurricane Florida, available now on our YouTube channel.
Yes, it is. That's right.
So when did you decide to leave New York and come back to Miami?
So I was in New York for like 10 years, and then I had applied for like a scholarship in Emerson College for grad school there. And I got the scholarship and was working also as a TA and other jobs around the school. So I had to do a thesis film for that graduate program. And at that point I had kind of like, I had shot in New York, and I didn't really like Boston at all, like in general. And New York was just so expensive to shoot in, especially if you don't have like resources there or like family, some type of connections where you can like film in someone's house and stuff. So I was like, let me think, maybe it's time to do something in Miami. So I was like, let me come up with a story centered around like Cuban upbringing and everything. And so that was 2019. And then I came down in March to shoot that. I found my cinematographer, who's a local filmmaker here, Ariel Ramon. And we worked together on that. We actually met through Mariquita's shoot. So we worked together on that, and then I flew down a couple classmates because obviously, if anybody knows, like in film school, usually your crew is your classmates and you help each other out, and that's how you're able to do things so cheap because nobody's getting paid. You're just favor for favor, which
doing the thing, yeah.
Which still happens with indie film, even if you're not in film school. But that it was a lot of that. So we shot that down here in Hialeah. A coworker of my mom's was renovating her house. So she conveniently at the same time. So she's like, oh, you have like 3 months that the house is just, there's no one in it, whatever. So I'm like, oh, can we shoot there for like a week? So we had the whole location. Really quickly, I just wrote into the script like a line where the daughter's like, oh yeah, he's always remodeling the house, just because there was stuff in the house that looked unfinished. But yeah, we took advantage and we shot there. And the shoot was great. It felt awesome to shoot in Miami, like where I was born and raised, like the cultural part of it, like even just filming in the neighborhoods in Hialeah and the houses and everything, where it's like, that just made me feel like I should be doing things here. Like what am I doing over there in New York, like struggling to get by and like to shoot anything and the money and all this. So I moved down at the end of 2019, literally like December, I want to say. And then the pandemic hit. I moved down and it was always as a like, oh, let's see how it goes, whatever. I might go back up or to LA, let's see. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm staying here. So I stayed and then I ended up just kind of raising a little more money to do another short called Overtime. It was like a ghost story kind of thing. So I was trying to kind of go back to horror, but I always tell people it's not like a horror movie because it's not. A lot of people kind of associate horror. They're like, okay, yeah, like a violent killer or something like that. But like ghost stories are horror movies, and they're not. It's very rare that a ghost story is like a nasty, violent, grimy horror movie. They're usually sad. They're more dramas. They're like
more psychological. Yeah.
Exactly. So I always tell people it's more that. Don't expect it to be like a really violent thing. So I made that, and then just kind of kept making stuff here and working here. And then my last short, Love and Hunger, we did through a Miami Film Lab. We helped with the fundraising, and that got into the Miami Film Festival, and it's kind of done well around the country too. But yeah, I kind of, after shooting that one film in 2019, it really just sparked in me like, oh, I should just come here and be making things here where this feels at home. And like the things I'm filming, I even noticed like shooting, I really like shooting like in natural locations sometimes, just out in nature and stuff. And like in New York, it's so hard to do that. But like here, I was like, oh, you could go to the beach. You can go, there's all these different kind of, even the sunsets here. Like I'm always filming sunsets because it's, you
gorgeous.
can actually see it, and it looks. It's things honestly I took for granted being here because you're born and raised here. You're like, okay, Miami, whatever, it sucks. I remember, and everyone's always like, I want to go to New York or LA, like that's where it's at. And then you go there, and like every city has its pros and cons. It's like there's no place that's the perfect paradise that you're gonna be happy completely with, you know. And you realize that quick. And then honestly, the way things are with prices of everything, like, it doesn't make a difference anymore. Like, it doesn't matter if you live in Miami or New York or LA, wherever the hell you live, it's expensive. So the price thing isn't even a problem. Like, just don't even think about that. So, you know, and Miami's, I've seen it growing. Like when I left in 2008, there was not really much of a film community here. It was very, I'm sure there was, but I guess it was just not easy to kind of access. But then when I came back in 2019, I realized like, oh, wow, like there's actually, you know, there's all these different organizations starting up and people, there's a community here that's actually been growing in the time that I've been gone. It's like, this is amazing. Like, and everyone's enthusiastic is the other part. Where like New York, everyone felt a little more jaded or like everyone's kind of in the industry or, you know, but here it's like everyone's excited to just make stuff, that's awesome. That's, that's great to have.
Yeah, it's really fun to be around people that we're going to do things one way or another, and everyone's kind of working to figure it out together, which is always fun. So have you found it easier to find collaborators and things since you get back and get your projects off the ground, or is it still just hard as hell?
I mean, it's still hard. Like there's still the raising money and like, and even with collaborators, like, yeah, in New York, there was people I would work with together a lot and we would collab. I feel like you always kind of find your collaborators when you're working, as long as you're like, have the mindset of like, I'm going to, like I always told myself with the shorts, it's like, I'm going to make at least, even if it's not like a short that we spend a lot of money on, I'm going to try to make something every year. At least every year I have something done, you know, and completed and worked with the same group of people. So I would say like, as far as difficulty to like get things together and going, it's not too different. The main difference is here, as far as resources go, just because I'm from here and that born and raised, like I have family, like it's just easier to have, you know, locations. For example, my mom's coworker got us that location for free. I shot the other overtime in one of the Mariquitas warehouses for free, like things like that, where I didn't have that in New York. You know, so New York, everything was like thousands of dollars to rent a location to shoot in. Where here, I've even gone here to like some restaurants, and the trick for anybody shooting anything for a restaurant, find out the day that they're closed, because most restaurants close one day, and then go to them and say, okay, we'll film when you're closed and we'll just pay for if there's somebody on staff that you have to have here, or maybe like a little money that you'll give them. But either way, they're making money when they would have been closed. So they're going to be a little more lenient to it versus being like, I need to shoot on this Saturday at this time, you know, so that's a little thing I learned along the way. It was like with bars and restaurants, like get when they're closed, like, you know,
100%. Like that is so key. I also don't try to shoot in a restaurant when it's open. Like it's just, it will go badly.
This episode is sponsored by Unique Producer Service is South Florida's premier grip and lighting house. In business over 50 years, they have the experience to help you along the way, whether this is your first rental or your 100th. If you need to come test out lights before you shoot, need equipment delivered, or you need a full crew, Unique has got you covered. You can visit their website at uniqueproducers.com or call them at 305-681-7627. Nestled between Miami and the Florida Keys lies an enchanted and tranquil estate. Palm Lodge House and Tropical Garden is a historic 2-acre property from 1912. Its old Florida-inspired decor is intended to transport you back over 100 years with old-world charm everywhere you look. The spacious 2-story, 3-bedroom house features an expansive porch, a high-ceiling foyer, a grand piano, and an outdoor living room, and is surrounded by lush tropical gardens with seashell walkways throughout. And it is the perfect place for your next shoot or event.
So let's talk a little bit more about the films that you have done. I know you've sent them all off to film festivals. How has your film festival strategy, for lack of a better word, gone? Have the films done well? What has that been like?
It's been pretty good. It's always tricky with that because I feel like there's so many people that try to give like this like magic like kind of formula of how to approach film festivals, and like with anything, it's not really like it's not always a hard, fast thing. Like there's festivals where I'm like, I've submitted and I'm like, oh, for sure this will get into that because it's Latino, whatever, this and that, and then it doesn't get in. But then there's like some random festival that they're like, oh yeah, well we love it, we'll take it. So. But yeah, obviously you want to have, like when I was doing a lot of the horror films, I would find the more genre specific festivals. The more like Cuban films I've been making, I go for the Latino festivals. So always kind of keeping in mind the audience for what you're making, which you should always be doing anyway, even if you're thinking of festivals or not. Just who's going to watch this and how does it appeal to that person? So. But the strategy, yeah, is just that, just finding the festivals that match up kind of with what the film is. And then obviously I would try to hit I would say early on when the first few films I made, I would submit to festivals that were like lower, that hadn't been around that long and like were cheaper and all that. But as you go on and you've done a few of those, you kind of want to start to break out of that and try to get bigger festivals as you go. But it's always good to start with those small ones. And then, yeah, I've submitted to some that are like, you know, it's not going to get in, like Sundance Land, all that. Honestly, Sundance, I wouldn't even bother like with a short film, like save that $60 or whatever it is. Because that's the other thing too, is that you're paying for all these submissions and they add up after a while. So, you know, it's like you could easily spend $3,000 or more on just submitting, and then you only get into like 3 things. So it's very
it's hard, especially with short films. Like it's so costly, and you're just not gonna make that kind of money back. Do you feel like you've gotten stuff out of those festivals? Like, have it been worth the entry fees?
Yeah, there's some for sure that you go and like, and they're all very different. Like that was one thing with this last short I did, Love and Hunger. It was in the Miami Film Festival, so. That was where it premiered, and that was the first screening, and that all my cast was there, and everybody was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, what a cool thing to go to film fest. Some of them hadn't been to film festivals before. I was like, yeah, it's great. And then there was another I won't say it, but there was another festival we went to where it was kind of a disaster. It was very like cheap. And they were like, what is this? I'm like, yeah, they all vary. And it wasn't like a festival that was new. It had been around for a bit. It was just, some things are just not as well organized as others, as that. It just happens. So, but there's definitely, I've gotten a lot out of a good amount of them. Like the most is like the networking and meeting other filmmakers and seeing what other people are working on, even like going to the feature screenings. I would do that a lot. I would say if you get into a festival, go to the festival and go to screenings. Like don't just go to your own screening. Yeah. Like go and like look at the schedule, see what movies you think might be interesting. And most of them, they give you the free pass through the whole festival anyway. So you might as well just go and watch some movies and then meet the filmmakers afterwards, ask something in Q&A or privately go up to them and like, oh, I really liked your feature. How did you do that? So just, I would say that as far as like networking and meeting more people, that's where the festivals are good. And then obviously there's ones that give awards where like, if you have those awards, you can now put on your resume and everything that you're an award-winning filmmaker, even if it's like for not that big of an award. Now you're an award-winning filmmaker. So yeah, I would say definitely, especially for short films, and I mean obviously for features. I haven't done one yet, but that I would say it's worth it as like a kind of a stepping stones in your career to go through these festivals and participate.
And that networking, like, what do you get out of? Like, have you gotten jobs out of that? Is it just to creatively like expand your brain as to what's possible as a filmmaker? Like, what is that networking getting you?
A little bit of both. Yeah, definitely have gotten some jobs out of it, or other filmmakers when they're doing their next project, they're like, oh, hey, sometimes it's not necessarily getting a job on set, but they'll ask me for feedback on their script, and you kind of share. Now it's like, okay, I'll send that person my script when I'm doing something. So it's getting that kind of community that you build with it. So yeah, I would, obviously there's some networking you do where like you never talk to the people again. Like you have a list of people that you never hear from, but there's always that like handful. It's like a numbers game almost. Like you meet 20 people, like 5 of those people you'll actually keep follow up with. And the other thing is you never know later on. Like I've had the situation sometimes where like I met someone in a festival and like even like 7 years later, you're like, oh, I think I know you from, yeah, you were in this and this. And then you bring up the movies that you saw. And like, so it's always like, yeah, I would say meet as many people. It doesn't hurt to meet as many people as possible. And I know
it's a long game.
And it's a social, like I'm not super social and outgoing at all. Like I'm not super extroverted or anything. So it's like, it takes me energy to actually go to these. And a lot of times I don't want to go. Like the last thing I want to do is go to like a party with like, and like walk around with like a drink. Like usually go straight for the drink, for the bar to get something and then just to have in your hand and like sip. But it's always like, it's always a stress to actually just go. But then usually when I'm there, which I think happens to most people, it's like you build up this anxiety of going out in your head. But then once you're there, it's a little, you kind of start talking to people and you relax and you're like, oh, people, it's not that stressful. It's fine. And then usually I find myself that I'm there, like I'm the last person who leaves usually. And I'm there drinking with whoever is there at the end. So it's a recurring thing that every single night, I'm talking like every single one. I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I'm not, maybe I won't go. And then I end up going and it's fine. So.
Yeah, I think people underestimate. I mean, we're such a collaborative art form and you need to work with people. So like whether you find people to work with or not at these events, just learning to really spend time with people and get to know people, like it's a really important part of what we do. Mm-hmm. And totally. I think especially film festivals are a great place to do that because you're with people who you already know you have something in common with.
Yeah, exactly. And there's always, you'll meet the people that give you vibes that they don't want to talk to you or that, but you kind of ignore those or you move on to the people that you kind of gravitate towards,
So from your experiences with the film festivals, has that changed kind of your career trajectory? Like has you tweaked how you do films because of the responses you've gotten at them? Or how has that kind of grown the more you have spent time in that festival circuit?
It's tricky because and a lot of what I do, whether it's horror or comedy, like usually... Honestly, for me, like, I don't even care if I win a thing or not. Usually it's when I'm there, like in the screening, it's hearing how people react. That really is like, if I did a comedy and it's every time there was supposed to be a joke, people are laughing. I'm like, okay, great. It works. Like that's the best thing. Or a horror movie and you can hear people kind of react, or basically just getting the emotional reaction you want out of the audience is like the best thing ever. Like that's like, and when it succeeds, you're like, wow, awesome. When it doesn't, then you're kind of like, oh, maybe I learned on the one I mentioned, Overtime, that was a ghost story. I learned there, like, because I like mixing comedy and horror, but I kind of learned on that one that you can't really you can do a horror comedy and have horror and comedy, but you can't do horror comedy at the same time. So like if there's a scene where the characters in this short, that was the situation, was a scene where the characters are wandering through like a spooky, dark warehouse, but they're kind of making little quippy jokes along the way. And I would show some people and they're like, well, I don't really feel tense or like the suspense because they're just joking the whole time. So, and in my head writing it, I was like, oh, like that kind of, the playing with the tension and the humor and all that. But when you actually watch it and see it, you're like, no, that doesn't. Like, I'm not even really laughing at the jokes and I'm not tense about the suspense situation because the tone is weird. Like, it's not flowing. So I kind of learned there, it's like, yeah, you got to, if you're going to do the comedy and the horror comedy, the comedy has to kind of be separate from the horror. Like, you have a scary moment, but then undercut it with a joke or something, or the other way around, have a jokey moment and then all of a sudden it gets really scary. And I've seen, like, in other shorts I've done later for Love and Hunger, for example, which deals with a cannibalism. At a certain point, the characters cut each other with
I love how you did that scene. So much. Like, if you haven't seen that movie, like, this scene in particular is done so well.
But that was, that was the goal, was to kind of have that scene actually, like, impact you when you see it. But throughout the whole movie, it's a comedy. But then basically there I learned, like, okay, let me make everything before that comedy and kind of light. And then once we slowly get to the point where you realize, oh, they're going to eat each other, then it shifts a little and gets a little more quiet. There isn't so much jokes or like, shenanigans. It's more like we're in the moment. There's no music. It's just the sound of the waves that they're around and all that. So that I learned that kind of from the mistake of the previous movie, was like, oh, you have to kind of break up these moments. So I'll say, yeah, everything is always like a learning situation. And now, for me, at least, it's the response you get when people are watching it and you watch them watch it. So I always like try to sit like in the back of the theater or like somewhere where I can just look at the audience, as creepy as it sounds. But like, yeah, you want to don't look at your movie, look at the audience that's watching your movie.
You've seen the movie.
You've seen the movie, yeah, who cares? Like watch the audience and see how they're reacting, and are they like quiet when it's a moment that's serious? Like,
do you find that getting advice before, as you're editing and doing the film from people, is helpful, or do you kind of work on your own, or what is that process like for you? Definitely,
for sure, feedback on, especially on the script, like on the writing part, because the writing is like that's another mistake I've learned from, is like I've had scripts where I didn't really get as much feedback, and I was kind of like, oh, I'll just, I know what I'm doing, I'll just do this, and this. And then when you go and even when you're shooting it, things are a little weird. Like you find a lot of like logic mistakes or things like that didn't on the page might have worked, but visually you're like, oh wait, that doesn't make sense. Or even you'll find later when you're editing, you're like, oh my God, why did I write so much dialogue? You don't need half of this conversation could be cut out. But that's, if you get feedback on writing and doing table reads, exactly. Doing table reads with your actors and everything, all of that helps you to kind of be like, okay, this is too much dialogue. Or that's usually what happens the most, at least with me, is I find the scenes go on a little more than they need to, and you have to kind of scale it back. But that definitely is just feedback from other people that are reading it. On the editing part, maybe a little bit less, because at that point I feel like people are also a little less. Like they might give you feedback, but it might not always be helpful, because they'll be like, oh, why don't you have a shot where the guy's doing this? And you're like, well, we shot already, so we don't have that. So sorry. So I feel like that kind of feedback's trickier, unless it's someone that really, I usually try to get feedback from other filmmakers or people that know, like, okay, he didn't get that shot, so I'm not going to tell him to do that. Like, I'm going to give feedback based off what's there. That can actually be happened, yeah. Right, exactly. And usually, if you've done it before, you kind of know that going in, so you'll know to not be like suggesting things that are impossible or kind of breaking someone's heart by telling them like, oh, this scene, you try to be like, no, maybe if you cut a little earlier, things like that. Or I had a friend one time just tell me, why don't you think about reordering the way that the structure of a scene is? Like, why don't you try putting that scene in the beginning and see how that plays? And then I tried that. I was like, oh, that actually works. So things like that are helpful, but yeah, I would be very careful about who you ask for feedback from on the edit. On the script, everybody, like whoever you can send it to. I mean, obviously people who are into film and that, like, you don't send it to someone who's my impression is always that people are really precious and like don't want to show anyone until the thing is perfect, and they miss an opportunity. Like, you're too close to it and blind to some of the issues. Like, the more people you can put it in front of, the more, even if you don't believe in like their impression of it, understanding how people are receiving something in the script or the edit or anything is really helpful. For sure. And you see things that like they might have reacted one way and you wanted them to react a different way. Like, why is that? And people are precious, but I agree. A lot of, especially if you're working with someone who's not a filmmaker, they're going to give you suggestions that you can't possibly take into account or just not helpful. Well, someone told, I forgot who it was. This might have even been like a celebrity or online or something, but someone was saying, when someone gives you feedback, you don't have to listen to the correction they make for you. Like, if they tell you, oh, maybe you should have a scene where this happens, don't be like, oh yeah, I'm going to just do that now. Like, no, most of the time, whatever they're suggesting is probably not right either. But the fact that they're telling you that there's something in that scene or something that's weird, listen to that and then maybe go back and look at it and be like, what are they not getting here that I maybe made a mistake here and there? But don't just take people's advice blindly. Like, that's that's the worst. Yeah. The important thing is to know that something's not working and not necessarily like they may or may not have figured out what is wrong, but clearly something needs to be worked on there. They're feeling it. Chocando. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's something, that's off. Especially with, I feel like dealing with like comedy and horror, that's a bigger thing. Because I feel like a personal drama in that, it's a little less, like if you're telling a story about something that happened to you and it's more about you trying to like express this thing or this emotion, then I feel weird being like, get rid of that scene that happened to you. There's some trauma from your childhood that you're trying to retell in this movie. Yeah, but most of the time that stuff needs to go. Yeah, that is. It is. I guess my filmmaker side is like, oh, but like I understand if they don't. But if your goal is like, I want this an audience to see this, and I'm not just making this for my own therapy. I'm making this for people to watch and be entertained by, and that. Then yes, you have to take in an audience's perspective. Yeah. And in the writing, I always push for, because I remember even teaching like undergrad students that a lot of people would be like, "Oh, I hate writing." I'm like, but writing is the cheapest part of production. Like, spend the time on the writing and like getting advice and taking you're never going to be at a cheaper point than the writing. So just like make sure that that's tight. And I've had scripts before where like I did a lot, like my thesis for grad school went through a lot of scrutiny because my professors had to look at it, other classmates, everything. And actually it was for the better for that, because I ended up reworking and retweaking. And when we shot, there wasn't a single scene or line of dialogue that was removed because the script was just so tight and that was just from revision. I love
that. There's just pre-production is so important.
It really is. Yeah. The same thing happened.
That's not even pre-production. This is writing, but like developing a story and doing that, like it saves so much time and energy and everything.
No, the pre-production really, because that's kind of the talking with your production designer, the cinematographer is a big one. If you don't sit and have a meeting with a cinematographer and go, okay, this is the type of thing I like the visually for it to be. Like I have my cinematographer idea who I work with. A lot of times I'll start doing storyboards, and he brought up a good thing, which maybe if you're working on like a bigger budget stuff for things that require effects or like a big action sequence or something that's very technically demanding that you're going to need a very thought out plan, then you should very detailed storyboard. But his whole take was that we were storyboarding without having a location. So, and I understand, like, because we're kind of ingrained in film school, like storyboard is so important. And even like the myth of like in film where it's like this director storyboarded every single scene and he drew, look at the amazing Spielberg's drawings and all. It was like, yeah, but like, if you don't have a location, like Spielberg has millions of dollars to make his movie, so he can draw whatever, they can design whatever.
He can make the location look whatever he wants.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you're indie, you don't really have that. So my cinematographer, it was a great lesson. He's like, dude, I don't even want to look at a shot list or a storyboard if you don't know the location, because we're just kind of shooting at nothing because we don't really know what the context is. And then sure enough, the best thing is I go with him on location and we kind of look at wherever the set is supposed to be and go, oh yeah, we can shoot like one location we had that was a cool, like a window. It was like an entrance lobby and then a window, and then that window crossed into like another room with like different lighting. So it was like a cool way to like, which, you know, if I had just thought originally writing the script, I wouldn't have thought to do that type of shot. But seeing the location was like, oh, we're going to have a shot where the actresses walk through the door, through the window, and then come out to the next room. And that was planned just from being there on the spot. So that, I forgot what was the initial thing for that question, but
I think that's great. I think this has been really great advice. So let us know, what is your next project?
So I'm going to do a feature next. I got the Oolite Arts cinema residency for 2024. Thank you.
Yay.
It was a big surprise. I did not. I apply. It's a dark comedy. I'm in talks to try to get Ruben Rabasa involved in it. It was written for him, so it'd be awesome if he gets in. I don't know what I'll do without it if he does it, but it's basically he's a older Cuban man whose lover passed away, and his soul is trapped in a taxidermy parrot that this enemy of his from the past cursed him to be trapped there after he died. So the movie starts with Ruben breaking into the guy who cursed him's house and like demanding, hey, you got to get my lover's soul out of this fucking parrot. Or sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to curse here. Out of this parrot, or I'm going to kill you. And the guy who cursed him had a stroke, so he can't talk. So his daughter, who's the caretaker at the moment, has to kind of mediate the whole conversation. And then we cut to flashbacks and see how Ruben's lover his soul got trapped in there and what exactly the situation was.
That seems like a great role for Ruben. Ruben, you should do this.
Yes, please.
So tell people, if they want to find you, to work with you or see some of your films, where can they find you online?
I'm mostly, honestly, just Instagram. Like, I don't really use, I was gonna say Twitter. I don't even know what it is at this point. Twitter or whatever X. I don't really mess around with any other. I tried TikTok a little bit, but it was just too. I don't really like social media. It's just like a necessary thing at this point to like network and stuff. But Cocuyo_productions is my Instagram handle. That's where I post. I've been trying to do like cartoons now too, because I kind of started with stop motion and that. So I've been kind of going back to making little, like South Park style, like cutout cartoons with After Effects. but I post that there and just other, you know, whenever I'm the festival tours and that I post the dates and everything. So, but yeah, that's my main page, my production company.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for coming. This is
fun.
fun.
Thank you for having me, and for everything you've been doing for the filmmaking community here. It's awesome to. You were one of the organizations that when I came back, I was like, wow, this is like awesome to have this opportunity here. You had the development series that was in one of the first ones on that.
Yeah,
was
that's true. You're an alum from our very first program.
Yeah, No, it was great. It was an awesome. I met, you know, a solid group of like filmmakers who are already doing features and everything. I was motivated to continue pursuing things, and yeah, it's been awesome.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's what we're here for. We're here to make shit happen.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
This episode is a production of Miami Film Lab, a nonprofit production company supporting local filmmakers as they work to make a living telling Miami stories. It was produced by Joe Turman and myself, Jen Orta Castellanos, and was recorded at Unicorn Fire Studios. Jed Royer at Royer Design made our logos. Our music is by Ola Hai. You can subscribe to Crew Call 305 on your preferred podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, leave a comment or review. And if you want to support our work, you can make a tax-deductible donation at miamifilmlab.org. Thanks so much for listening.